Compared to the Biblical Proverbs, William Blake's Proverbs of Hell reads like fire in the blood. It's raw, biting, and utterly without mercy. These proverbs don't offer comfort or guidance. They sneer at the very idea. Each line is a weapon aimed squarely at the smug certainty of polite society, daring us to question every rule we've ever been told to follow. Blake doesn't hand over the answers, but rather he drops us into a world of contradictions, where reason wrestles with passion, and good and evil are slippery, shifting things. These proverbs aren't here to coddle. They are here to make us uncomfortable, to strip away the soft layers and force us to reckon with what it really means to be human. And if you're willing to dig through the barbs and the ashes, there's something fierce and timeless to be learned. But what qualifies William Blake to tell us anything of Proverbs? Least of all, the Proverbs of Hell. Well, William Blake wasn't your average poet. He was a madman, a mystic, and someone who wasn't afraid to spit in the eye of convention. Born in 1757, Blake spent his days etching wild visions into copper plates, and his nights dreaming of angels and devils. He wasn't just a writer, he was a prophet in a time when prophets were out of fashion. He didn't write for fame or fortune, he wrote because he saw the world differently and couldn't keep it to himself. He had no formal schooling beyond the basics, but he had a mind like a whetstone, sharpening itself on art, scripture, and the endless grind of London's grim streets. Why should we listen to him? Well, some might say that Blake didn't just understand humanity's light, he wrestled with its darkness, and this gave him a more balanced outlook. He saw heaven and hell as two sides of the same coin, and wasn't afraid to toss said coin in the air and let it land where it would. Frankly, Blake's ideas and his proverbs just stood out back then, especially in a time when religious belief was at a relative high and a very specific set of rules and concepts governed the everyday, those that Blake frequently deviated from in his writings. We find these very proverbs in Blake's aptly named Marriage of Heaven and Hell, a series of texts that were written with sort of a nod to biblical prophecy. However, instead of adhering to the biblical sentiments, Blake infused his own personal, romantic, perhaps even revolutionary beliefs that are still thought-provoking to this day. Like many of his works, The Marriage of Heaven and Hell was published on printed sheets from etched plates containing prose, poetry, and even illustrations. Unlike Milton and Dante, who saw hell as a place for punishment, Blake imagined it as a source of wild, untamed energy, like a chaotic celebration of life and passion. This stands in contrast to heaven, which he viewed as strict, controlled, and rule-bound. Blake's goal was to create vivid and imaginative ideas, what he called memorable fancies, to show how traditional morality and organized religion can be stifling and repressive. Essentially, Blake saw hell as a symbol of freedom and creativity, while heaven represented oppressive order. In the most famous part of the Marriage of Heaven and Hell, Blake gives us the Proverbs of Hell, those that, as aforementioned, demonstrate a very different kind of wisdom that one might expect to find in the biblical book of Proverbs. These proverbs aren't just sardonic, but they're provocative, oftentimes paradoxical, perhaps even nonsensical at first glance. The purpose of such proverbs aren't to lecture the reader or to bring them round to a certain point of view, but rather to challenge the reader, to energize one's thoughts, and to maybe open one's eyes to a reality that might not be possible with a more religious mindset. The Proverbs begin with an introduction by Blake, as he tells us that whilst in hell, it actually wasn't all that bad. As I was walking among the fires of hell, delighted with the enjoyments of genius, which to angels look like torment and insanity, I collected some of their proverbs, thinking that as the sayings used in a nation mark its character, So the Proverbs of Hell show the nature of infernal wisdom better than any description of buildings or garments. What Blake is essentially saying here is that as he metaphorically walked through hell, he was thrilled by the creative and passionate energy he found there, what he calls the enjoyments of genius. To the rigid and orderly minds of angels, and perhaps the religiously devout, this same energy might have looked like suffering or madness, but to Blake, it's inspiring and full of life. While in hell, he collected proverbs, or wise sayings, because he believed they revealed the spirit and mindset of hell more clearly than descriptions of its physical appearance could. The proverbs are as follows: in seed time learn, in harvest teach, in winter enjoy. What Blake tells us here is that life has its seasons and that one ought to make the most of them. When you're young and green, soak up all the knowledge you can. When you've got the experience, it should be shared so as to mutually benefit everyone. And when the cold sets in, whether it's old age or hard times, one can sit back and enjoy what they've built, whether this be from their own knowledge or from what they've taught. In essence, the fruits of one's labor ought to be enjoyed. Drive your cart and your plow over the bones of the dead. What Blake tells us is that one should not be restricted by tradition, superstition, or the legacies of those long buried, but rather they should plow through them. The old bones can be left to die, but they shouldn't hold anyone back from achieving what they want, or from being who they want. The road of excess leads to the palace of wisdom. Here, Blake is not saying that moderation is worthless. He's saying wisdom comes from testing limits, even crashing through them. Only those who've burned their fingers can understand the fire, and only those who risk going too far can find out how far one can go. Prudence is a rich, ugly old maid, courted by incapacity. Caution has its uses, sure, but Blake thinks it's overglorified. Prudence might be wealthy, but she's dull, stagnant, and attracts nothing but the equally lifeless. Fortune favors the bold, not the cautious. In essence, one might be safe and successful on a path well paved, but a truer glory can be found on a path less traveled. He who desires but acts not breeds pestilence. Dream all you want, but if you don't act on it, you're creating a rot in yourself. Desire without action festers, corrupting the soul like a disease. In essence, what Blake tells us here is that if you want something, you have to go after it. Otherwise, you're essentially harming yourself. The cut worm forgives the plough. The worm accepts its fate because the plough is just doing what it must. Nature's full of brutal necessity, and forgiveness often means understanding the inevitability of pain. Doesn't make it hurt less though. Dip him in the river who loves water. If someone's got a passion, throw them into it. Blake's saying to give people what they crave. Let them immerse themselves. The water lover thrives in the current, even if the rest of us would drown. A fool sees not the same tree that a wise man sees. Two people can look at the same thing and see two entirely different worlds. The fool sees a tree. The wise man sees life, death, growth, and the whole bloody universe tied up in its roots. Wisdom isn't about what you see, it's about how you see it. He whose face gives no light shall never become a star. If you've got no spark, no passion, you'll never shine. Blake's all about fire. Life needs it. Creativity needs it. And without it, you're just another dull rock in the sky. Eternity is in love with the productions of time. The eternal craves the fleeting. It's the things we create, art, ideas, legacies, that give time meaning. Eternity is not found in endlessness, but in the beauty of what's born, grows, and dies within it. Put simply, we might have an expiration date, but the work we leave behind has the potential to live forever. The hours of folly are measured by the clock, but of wisdom no clock can measure. Foolishness sticks to schedules, people clocking in and out, wasting their days on trivial things. Wisdom, though, that's timeless. When you're truly learning, growing, or creating, time loses all meaning. No bird soars too high if he soars with his own wings. Blake tells us that ambition has no limit if it's fueled by your own strength and passion. Fly as high as you can. Blake's telling us that the only ceiling is the one we build for ourselves. A dead body revenges not injuries. Dead is dead. Grudges, vengeance. These are the games of the living. Blake's reminding us that life is short and holding on to spite is a waste of time. In the end, all you leave behind is bones. If the fool would persist in his folly, he would become wise. Stick with your stupidity long enough and you will eventually learn something. Failure is a harsh but effective teacher. Blake's point? There's value in foolishness if you're willing to push through it. Shame is pride's cloak. Shame and pride are two sides of the same coin. When someone's ashamed, it's often because their pride's been wounded. Blake's saying that shame isn't humility, it's pride hiding its face. Prisons are built with stones of law, brothels with bricks of religion. Blake's taking a shot at the systems that control us. Laws build prisons, restricting, punishing, and confining. Meanwhile, Blake suggests that the rigid moralizing of religion often drives people toward indulgence in secret, building the very sins it claims to hate. The pride of the peacock is the glory of God. Nature flaunts its beauty and extravagance without shame. Blake's saying here there's something divine in boldness and self-celebration. Why hide the colours you were given, especially if they were given by God? The lust of the goat is the bounty of God. Desire isn't a sin, it's a part of life's design. The goat's lust, natural and unashamed, is a gift from the same hand that made it. Blake's pointing out the divine in what many would call base or animalistic. The wrath of the lion is the wisdom of God. Even rage has its place in the grand scheme. The lion's fury isn't random, it's survival, strength, and instinct. Blake's saying there's wisdom in power unleashed, even if it looks dangerous or destructive to us. The nakedness of woman is the work of God. Here, Blake encourages readers to forget shame and to remind us that there's nothing more natural, beautiful, or divine than the human form. You might say that Blake's specifying of women is reflective of his sexuality, that he's unapologetic about finding women attractive, particularly when they're naked. In a way, it might be said that Blake is challenging what religion or society might call sinful and reframing it as the perfect work of creation. Excess of sorrow laughs, excess of joy weeps. Push any emotion too far and it flips on its head. When grief grows too big, it breaks into mad laughter. Joy can be so overwhelming it brings tears. Blake's showing us how extremes can collapse into their opposites. The fox condemns the trap, not himself. The sly fox blames the trap for his trouble, not his own greed or carelessness. Blake's saying it's human nature to shift blame outward, avoiding harsh truths about our own choices. It might also be said here that we can be too hard on ourselves when we fail, and could even be a jab at self-flagellation practices commonly found in religious traditions. Joys impregnate, sorrows bring forth. Happiness plants seeds of potential, creativity, hope, growth, but it's suffering that forces them to bear fruit, shaping and sharpening us in ways comfort never could. The bird a nest, the spider a web, man, friendship. Just as birds and spiders instinctively create homes, humans are wired to build connections. Friendship is our nest, our web, a thing as natural as breathing. Just as the bird or the spider cannot function properly without their nests and webs, man cannot function properly without friends. What is now proved was once only imagined. Every great discovery or invention started as someone's wild idea. Blake's telling us to trust imagination. It's the birthplace of everything we now call truth or scientific fact. The cistern contains, the fountain overflows. A cistern holds water, safe but still. A fountain spills over, brimming with life and movement. Here Blake's drawing a line between containment and abundance, between hoarding and giving freely. One thought fills immensity. A single idea, when it's big enough, can feel like it takes up the whole world. Blake's pointing out the power of focus, of how the right thought can stretch to fill endless space. Perhaps one idea can change the world itself, whether for good or for bad. Always be ready to speak your mind, and a base man will avoid you. Blake tells us here that it's important to say what you mean, no matter who's listening. Weak or dishonest people, the base ones in this instance, will steer clear, because truth is something they cannot handle. Everything possible to be believed is an image of truth. If someone can believe it, there's a grain of truth in it, no matter how twisted or distorted. Blake's not saying every belief is fact, but that truth wears many faces, some harder to recognize than others. The eagle never lost so much time as when he submitted to learn of the crow. In this example, the eagle, majestic and powerful, wastes its time trying to learn from the crow, a bird of lesser skill and ambition. Blake's warning is to choose your teachers wisely, or risk being dragged down by those beneath you. It's important not to be influenced by those who know no better than yourself. The fox provides for himself, but God provides for the lion. The cunning fox scrapes by on its wits, but the mighty lion, he's provided for by something greater. Blake's saying strength and power don't grovel. They command respect and are rewarded by the natural order. As the plough follows words, so God rewards prayers. Just as a plough carves the earth after commands are spoken, Blake suggests prayers are answered only when they move something into action. It's not about empty words, it's about what those words drive forward. The tigers of wrath are wiser than the horses of instruction. Raw passion and fury hold a wisdom that careful obedience and tame learning can never reach. Blake's tigers act on instinct and truth, while the horses trot along the paths they're told to follow. Expect poison from standing water. Still water looks safe, but it breeds disease. This is Blake's warning against stagnation, whether in ideas, emotions, or life itself. If it doesn't move, it rots. You never know what is enough unless you know what is more than enough. Moderation's fine and all, but you'll only understand limits by breaking them. Blake tells us that if you go too far, or push too hard, then you'll know where enough really lies. Listen to the fool's reproach. It is a kingly title. When a fool criticizes you, wear it like a crown. It means you've done something bold enough to scare them, something beyond their understanding. I'm reminded of Tyrion Lannister's quote, "Wear their words like armor and they can never hurt you." As the caterpillar chooses the fairest leaves to lay her eggs on, so the priest lays his curse on the fairest joys. Blake's not pulling punches here. He puts priests in his crosshairs, comparing them to caterpillars who target the best and brightest leaves. However, instead of leaves, he means people, and instead of eggs, he means guilt and condemnation. Whilst many surely find comfort in the priest, Blake rather scathingly accuses the priest of ruining everyone's good time, turning the fairest joys into something sinful. To create a little flower is the labor of the ages. Even the smallest, simplest thing in nature, a flower, takes countless years and forces to come into being. Blake's reminding us of the staggering complexity behind life's quiet wonders, and that maybe we should appreciate the smaller things. As the air to a bird or the sea to a fish, so is contempt to the contemptible. Just like the birds live in the air and fish in the water, the contemptible thrive in scorn. They draw it to themselves, and it's as natural to them as breathing. The crow wished everything was black, the owl that everything was white. Everyone wants the world to match their own view. The crow, grim and shadows, sees black as truth. The owl, wise and aloof, believes in white. Blake showing how narrow perspectives can ultimately warp one's reality. Sooner murder an infant in its cradle than nurse unacted desires. Blake doesn't mince words here. He's saying unfulfilled desires fester and grow into something far worse. He's saying it's better to act, even recklessly, than to let your dreams rot away in inaction. Whilst the murdering of infants is obviously a metaphor, Blake makes it seem that not acting on one's desires is the absolute worst thing a person can do. Where man is not, nature is barren. Blake attempts to highlight the importance of humanity here, and may even come across as a bit conceited with how essential he believes humanity to be. He expresses that without humanity, nature has no meaning. It may exist, but it lacks purpose, creativity, and understanding. Blake saying that it is humans who bring the world to life with their perceptions and imagination. William Blake didn't write to make readers comfortable. He wrote to shake readers, to drag them out of their cozy little worlds of convention and certainty, and to toss them headlong into his vision of hell. What can we learn from Blake today? Plenty, if you've got the guts for it. He reminds us that wisdom often lies in what we fear, our passions, our excesses, our fury. He dares the reader to question authority, to see beauty in what others call sin, and to find certain creativity in chaos. Blake encourages readers to embrace their desires, to speak their minds, and to push past the safe boundaries that many may find themselves in. It is not a godless, moralless life that Blake seeks to incite, no, but rather a life that accepts all elements of human behavior, the good and the bad. But Blake doesn't offer easy answers. His proverbs challenge readers to live fully, even when it's messy, dangerous, or painful. They ask readers to walk the line between creation and destruction, to dive into the inferno of life, and emerge wiser for the burn. If we've learned anything from Blake, it's that hell isn't a place to fear, it's a forge, and if you let it, it will shape you into something stronger, sharper, and perhaps truer than you were before. As always guys, if you've enjoyed today's episode, then don't forget to give this video a thumbs up and don't forget to subscribe for more content just like this. Until next time.